Hi, everyone. This is Kristen Hawkins, and welcome to this new episode of Explicitly Pro Life Podcast. As you know, we're in a special mini season. Socialism sucks, and so does abortion. And today I'm really excited to have our special guest on, Reverend Robert Sircio. Father Sircio is the founder of the Acton Institute. Many of you all have probably seen Father Sircio in YouTube videos and lectures. He lectures all across the country in universities, businesses. His op-eds have appeared in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Times, National Review, Detroit News. He's often on TV. You'll see him called to do various media interviews about economics, civil rights, issues of other religious concerns. He's been, everywhere: CBS, CNN, ABC, NPR, sure, Fox News as well. He has received his Master's of Divinity degree from Catholic University of America. He had an undergraduate degree from University of Southern California and the University of London. He also, and many of our listeners will appreciate this, was awarded an honorary doctorate in Christian ethics from Franciscan University of Stonewall, which is right down the road from where I'm at right now in Pittsburgh, PA. Father Sircio, thanks for joining us.
Be with you. Thank you very much for what you're doing.
Well, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. And as I was telling you before, I've been having conversations this season with a broad number of folks about socialism and how do we as pro-lifers advocate for policies that not only protect the most vulnerable in the womb, but also the vulnerable after they've been born without falling kind of for the leftist socialist policies that will actually lead to more human destruction. But something that we really haven't talked a lot about yet this season is what are some of the really what are some of the real effects of socialism? We hear like the talking points from the GOP, and we'll say socialism sucks or it kills. But then what's with the reality that awaits us? Like in Venezuela, for example, I'm sure most folks listening, tuning in, have heard about what's happened in Venezuela. But can you walk us through how a socialist economic policies got Venezuela to the point that they are, and maybe some other examples?
Well, yes, of course, it's not just Venezuela. We have
Sadly.
100 and some years now of various kinds of experiments, of various kinds of socialism. There isn't just one kind of socialism. It kind of takes a certain flavor. On the other hand, there are certain consistencies. We see these things happen over and over again: the shortages, the inflation, the centralization of power, the repression of free speech, the jailing of dissidents, and all of these things. It's Venezuela, but it's Cuba, and it was the Soviet bloc countries, and it's China right now, that's going on in China. And you have this array of things that are diverse in one sense and very consistent in another sense. And I think the way to get underneath it is to ask yourself what socialism really is. And I think particularly for your generation, this is hard because much of what I've just spoken about is a memory for me. I mean, I remember, Cuba coming into power. I remember Red China. I've been to Venezuela before and been to Venezuela since. And for a lot of your generation, these are historical reference points and not necessarily actualities. The thing that causes, first of all, the thing I want to say is socialism is not just being concerned about other people. A lot of people think that it's love, it's solidarity, it's support, it's an attentiveness to vulnerability. All of those values are to be praised and emulated. We must, as I'm a Christian, I have to emulate that. I think that it was Winston Churchill who put it very well and very memorably, and he did this in 1904, by the way, or 1908. He said the socialism of the early church said, everything that I have is yours. The socialism of the modern form of socialists says, everything that you have is mine. And it's really the difference between the social impulse, the solidarity, the concern for vulnerability that I want, the whole virtue of that kind of Christian solidarity is that it is voluntary, is that something has inspired us radically and interiorly to be concerned about other people. Socialism, on the other hand, that is, as an ideology, as an economic paradigm, is force. It's ultimately it's coercion. It's redistribution of wealth. It's centralizing power so as to achieve the abolition of private property and all of the rest of it. So, and then there's also a mistake on what capitalism means, and we could talk about that as well. But as we're talking about socialism, I think this is a good starter here. The key. I think the key fallacy of socialism, if I were to just kind of point to one thing, is what Hayek called the fatal conceit of socialism. What he means by that is central planners, whatever kind of socialist construct, because that's ultimately it's going to come down to centralized planning, political planning. They have a conceit that they know what people need. And they know how to get the resources to the people in need. And that's not just arrogance, it's just economically impossible. Because the moment you impede the information flow of a free society and a free economy, because prices are basically information that's communicated to people about scarcity or abundance and the rest of it. The moment you intervene into that, it's not just that you're achieving a good intention, it's that you're blocking information. In other words, you're dumbing down society. You're creating stupidity. That's why you have the shortages, because people don't know what the real cost of it is anymore, because you've destroyed the economy that enables us to know those things. Prices are signals that tell us about the relative abundance or scarcity of products. And of course, what we know in economics is that when something is scarce, the price goes up. When it's abundant, the price goes down. And so I think that's the thing. If we can understand that's what we mean when we talk about socialism, not good intentions, not solidarity, not reverence for the vulnerable, then we have an understanding of why these things can happen and why we can predict that they're going to happen.
And that's I think that's what's interesting when you think about socialist economic policies and why so many people are raising red flags right now with everything that's been happening in Washington D.C., the proposals, AOC's Green New Deal. It's not that I find it so frustrating when you watch the debates when, for example, you're talking about the Green New Deal, and if I would come out on a college campus during one of my speeches and rail against the Green New Deal, the first argument that a protester would make would be, well, you say you're pro-life, but you're not pro-life, because if you were so pro-life, you would be for the Green New Deal because that's going to save lives, because it's going to stop global warming, and it's going to stop the destruction that weather patterns can have, and that's not pro-life. And I always love when people who are for abortion like to tell me what being pro-life is and try to define our term. But it's not that I don't care about the destructive nature of weather, or that that I want to be blind to science, that whether or not global warming is going on and what the impact is actually having. But it's very clear, though, when you see a policy like the Green New Deal, that it's going to lead to destruction of lives in other ways if implemented.
Yeah, because the solution is always the same, isn't it? It's always more government, more taxation, more redistribution of wealth, more curtailing of the economy, which again is information flow. If you want to conserve property, then you have to privatize it. The people who take care of property best are people who own the property. Ask yourself, do you drive a rental car in the same way as you drive your own car? Or perhaps a more crude metaphor would be, would you prefer to go to a restroom in someone's home or a public restroom in a truck stop? And why? That's the question. Why? It's because when you don't have ownership of something, you don't conserve it. You don't take care of it as well because it doesn't have any value to you. It's what they call the tragedy of the commons in economics. So the same thing with the environment. If we could find ways to, and I think there are ways to do it. There are a lot of technical policies that could be put in place where you more specifically identify what a person owns, what the boundaries of those property rights are, and what responsibility they have when there are externalities associated with those properties that you own. So if I have a backyard and I create such a fire that is going to affect your house, then there are some limits on that based on private property, based incentivizing people to conserve what they know will benefit them, what they own. And the solution, the opposite solution in the Green New Deal as an example, is to socialize everything. And that means when everybody owns it, nobody owns it.
That's scary. And the proposals that we've continued to see I just want to ask myself, did anyone in Capitol Hill ever take an economics course, or has AOC gone to Venezuela or some of these countries?
I don't know that she has, but the temptation to power. Lord Acton said that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And this doesn't just happen on the left, by the way. This happens among conservatives. Is the moment they get there, they say, well, we have to have practical solutions to these things. And it means because I know what people in my district need. And so they're going to have these arguments over how much money. The thing that really scares me isn't so much the New Deal or the Green Deal stuff. It's these deficit spending, these trillion-dollar budgets. This is going to be the next generation, the generation after that. You want to talk about the unborn. The unborn are going to be paying for this. Even the unconceived, the people who aren't even conceived yet are going to be paying for this. And if there's no consequences to deficits, then there's no scarcity in the world. Then there's no economic problem. But of course there is.
Yeah. No, that's a very, very important point that I think that a lot of people is just simply missing. I mean, and to be fair, I mean, Donald Trump, President Trump, for all the amazing pro-life, appointments he made and policies, was like the worst Republican president we've ever had. I think it was like the deficit doubled under Biden from Bush to Biden, and President Bush had, remarkably increased the deficit because of the war on terror. Then you had Biden, it doubled with Obama, and then Donald Trump blew it out of the water.
Right.
And now we have this President Biden infrastructure plan, which, as someone who just traveled across the country in RV, our roads are terrible.
Well, they are.
Like, it is bad. Like, we would hit potholes. I'm like, that's it. My pots and pans just fell out, everything. We're going to blow out a tire. Like, we need to take care of our roads. There are practical things. But the budget that President Biden just introduces.
Well, it's not about infrastructure. I mean, it's redefinition of the word infrastructure. I mean, there's no respect for the language here. This is not infrastructure.
So I guess, why should pro-life young people who, what would be your best sales pitch to pro-life young people who say, okay, Kristen, you're doing this whole thing on socialism. I don't really care about politics. I just want to save babies. Why should they care and stand guard and speak out against socialist economic policies?
The core economic assumption of socialism, again, socialisms, the various kinds of it, because they come in different flavors. And it's a moving target. If you criticize North Korea, they say, well, that's not really socialist. Venezuela, that's not really socialist. And they move all around the board.
Mm-hmm.
But
Not respecting the terms.
right. When words are up, definitions are up for grabs. You can go anywhere. We'll be at this all day. But here's the key economic concept of socialism. It is that the solution to the moral dilemma of maldistribution of wealth is redistribution of wealth. And that is because there's just so much wealth to go around. So we have to, if somebody has a big piece of the pie and somebody else has a little sliver of the pie, the solution to that is to take from those who have and give to those who have not. That is called in economics zero sum. It's the zero sum fallacy. And here's why it's a fallacy. Because the economy is not static. The economy is not a pie that needs to be divided up so somebody gets a bigger piece, somebody else naturally, logically gets a smaller piece. The economy grows. When we use the word make money, we really mean that. People bring to the table resources and ideas that can transform things or discover things or create new processes that bring value, and people place value on that. So we are increasing the wealth. And when you increase the wealth, you may have somebody who has a big piece of the pie, and maybe their piece of the pie gets bigger, but also those who have smaller pieces of the pie get bigger pieces of the pie. And the slogan, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, is simply not true. From any demographic economic study, the fact of the matter is the rich are getting richer and the poor are also getting richer. It's that they're not getting as rich as the rich, but they're not getting poorer, generally speaking. I mean, there are some exceptions to this, Venezuela being one of them, where people are better. Ask anybody from a developing country, are you better than your parents were? Absolutely. And are they better than their parents were? Absolutely. So the dynamism of an economy has to be protected. Now, when it comes to the question, that's the economic concept. What is the source of that wealth? The source of that wealth is not the government. The government can only redistribute. The government doesn't make money. It may print it, which when you print enough of it, it creates inflation, but it doesn't make it. What is the source of it? John Paul II said it poetically and memorably. He says, man's greatest resource is man himself. That is, we have to have an anthropological view of the economy, that the center of the economy is the human person, because the human person is the one who creates it. It's human beings who respond to products that are offered on the market because they know what they need. And when the price system is free, then they know what the real needs are. This is why the pro-life position, protecting every human person who comes into the world, we don't see babies as mouths, primarily mouths that need to be fed. We see them as minds that can produce and create, that human beings are valuable. If a person has, let's say, a flock of sheep, you don't say that the person who has 10 sheep is poorer than the person who has one. Why? Because the sheep are productive. They bring value with them. So too with human beings, even more so, because we have this creative capacity in ourselves. Why look at a person who has 10 kids in a family and say they're poor, but a person who has one is rich? That's not true. The social reality of human beings produces wealth. It doesn't reduce wealth. The Malthusian error is simply an error.
Wow. Yeah, I think that was a really great sales pitch as to why any young pro-lifer, any pro-lifer of any age should care about socialism and how destructive socialism is. What do you think are the risks, I guess, of our nation kind of continuing down this path of huge deficit spending, passing, the Biden infrastructure bill, the AOC's Green New Deal. What are the real risks that we could face?
Well, I mean, the economists are already talking about it. And by this, I don't mean just conservative economists, just any mainstream economist realizes that you can't just keep spending. And
Mhm.
again, it's not just Biden. I mean, Biden's a few trillion here and there. I mean, we had that the whole reaction to the pandemic was an exercise in the fallacy of economic thinking. I mean, everybody said we needed to stimulate the economy. Indeed, we did. But why did it have to come from the government? What if instead of this whole year of $1 trillion packages, which has now made it more palatable to
Mhm.
introduce more $1 trillion packages, what if we just did a tax holiday? That would have stimulated the economy. Could you imagine people not having to pay taxes? uh,
Mm.
Businesses not having to pay taxes, you would have had an organic, a natural stimulus to
Mm.
the economy that wouldn't have depleted and now disincentivized people to work, dislocated the pricing system and the supply lines and everything. Talk to anybody who needs chlorine for their pool. They can't get it anymore. We've disrupted the entire economic mechanism that communicates needs
Mhm.
and desires. And I think that to do now more of it is to really introduce I'm sorry, the old phrase, the medicine that is worse than the disease.
Mm. That's absolutely right. Absolutely right. And we're still seeing, the reverberations about everything that's happened with COVID of, still can't get certain goods. And we are saying with the chlorine, like there's gonna be a lot of pools that can't
Yeah,
operate
yeah.
this summer because of this chlorine shortage, or if
And
you're trying to build a home right now.
getting your cabinets in or your floor in or
Hmm.
just anything. It's going to take a while for that to recohere. And as long as we have these disincentives for people to go to work, the
Right.
restaurants forget about the 50% policy. You can't find people to work at 50% capacity.
That's
So
right.
what happens if you go to 100? We have to really think rationally and holistically about an economy and not politically. Everybody says, "Oh, we've politicized this whole thing." Well, of course we've politicized this whole thing because everything having to do with our health care is politicized. The cost of our drugs, the
That's
development and the
right.
research for the drugs, the licensing for the hospitals, even hand sanitizer. We had to get special permission for some of our distilleries to shift from producing bourbon, which is a great pity to lose that market, but to shift to using hand sanitizer. They had to get special permission for masks and things like this. All this licensure,
Yep.
everything is politicized. So, of course, the pandemic was going to be
Yeah.
politicized.
Yeah, I mean, I know I talked about that. I think it was a year or so ago. I was giving speeches on campuses, and I was talking about, what are some, small government ideas that could have big effects on our economy. And one of the ideas was, why is it that if you want to start a hospital, you have to go before a board to get a board to say you should be able to start a hospital, and that board is made up of your competitors of other hospitals, and then they decide whether or not, yeah, there's really a need in our community to start your own hospital. Like,
Sure.
as long as it's safe and you're hiring people who have, medical degrees, legit medical degrees, and you're not, distributing medicine in the wrong way or against standard protocol.
Sure.
Why do you have to have your competitors agree that, yeah, we need a hospital, you can start another hospital
There
here?
was a diverse system in the United States for the provision of health care and the certification of medical doctors at the late part of the 19th century into the 20th century, the early part of the 20th century, which produced a diversity of medical schools. You didn't have this one
Mhm.
AMA, big trade union that regulated access to certification of doctors. And the result of that period of time, this was called a period of fraternal organizations. They had all kinds of fraternal. So usually it was an ethnic group, Poles or African Americans, who would contribute for insurance purposes. And then that money was used and invested not only just in the healthcare of the people who were part of the system, but also in producing doctors and hospitals that satisfied those needs. The government came along and basically abolished the fraternal organizations, so you don't have them. You have remnants of them now. The Knights of Columbus would be a remnant of that fraternal organization insurance thing. But what you had then were schools for Jewish doctors and schools for African American doctors and nurses and hospitals and all these other things. And now it's become a trade union.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And I mean, don't get me started on like AppLog and all the challenges that we're having with
student loans.
The ACOG. I mean, AppLog is, reporting American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs. They have members in the American College of OBGYNs, and it's unbelievable just the politicization that's happened there and how it's gone completely pro-abortion, like not even pro-choice, like pro-abortion.
Yes.
And the state governments and governments now are taking whatever ACOG is saying as like gospel truth.
Right. And the authorization or licensure of counselors, for instance, that you can't recommend certain forms of therapy for people who want a relief from whatever the malady is. It has to be very politically correct and sensitive and woke and all of the rest of it. And if we had a variety of certification boards, good housekeeping seals of approval, then people would acclimate themselves to what their cultural or religious system certified, rather than centralizing the whole thing. See, that's the thing. Yeah. It's interesting that the progressives, the left, always talks about diversity, but centralization is the antithesis of diversity. It's just basically the cookie cutter approach, rather than let 1,000 flowers bloom. I think Mao actually said that.
Wow.
In a little red book.
In the little red book. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting, and I think there are some real ramifications that we're going to have to suffer through if we continue to, we're talking about inflation now for the next 2 or 3 years, and what does that look like for all of us? And businesses can't hire because people don't want to work and don't have to work right now if they're getting paid by the government, and that's going to have some real effects on the economy.
Ask Venezuela what inflation looks like.
Yeah, I mean that's what I think what's scary. It's like right now our inflation is meat prices, and I've been joking they're going to try to make us all vegans here, which may not end up being a joke because the meat prices are so high, and I think they're going to kind of be imposing the Green New Deal by stealth. But Venezuela, I mean, the prices, and if you look back in history leading up to World War I, in Germany, and the inflation that happened, the hyperinflation that happened there. This is a very scary thing, and I don't think a lot of folks have lived through this yet and have experienced what inflation really can do, and the effects it'll have throughout the entire economy that we're going to face.
I think you're quite right. Quite right.
So I guess my final question for you would be then how do we, as pro-life people, how do we seek social justice, and how do we try to build up folks in our community, build social justice, create social justice without falling into socialism? Because those are two very separate things. I think a lot of people think that they are the same thing. We've been talking about how they're not the same thing, but how do we as pro-lifers do that without falling into this trap of, well, we need to support all these terrible ideas that are going to lead to the destruction of millions of lives?
Right. In Catholic social teaching, we have a principle that really helps us think through this. Protestants have a similar version of this. In Catholic social teaching, it's called the principle of subsidiarity. In a Reformed Protestant, through Abraham Kuyper, they call it sphere sovereignty. They're different, but they kind of get at the same point. And if I may just take a moment to explain what subsidiarity is, the bumper sticker definition is that needs are best met at the most local level of their existence. that you only go up to higher levels of social organization when there's a manifest failure at lower levels. So the first level of social organization to respond to my needs if I'm sick is my family. And when the family has a problem, then it's the extended family. And when the extended family has a problem, then it's the community or the parish or the mediating institutions locally. Why? Because at those levels, people really know what the needs are. They know whether I'm just sitting on my couch eating peanut butter cookies and watching television, and that's why I'm not working, or because I have a bad back or whatever it happens to be. And they know how to deal with you, given that reality. When it goes up to higher levels without knowing what's going on at the local level, without there being a manifest failure on the local level, then it becomes more exploitative, more disincentive to work. So that each level, you say, yes, if there is a real failure, then temporarily higher levels of social organization can come and help, but not so as to replace those normative relationships. And by the way, this is all articulated for us in the encyclical that St. John Paul II wrote, Centesimus Annus. I think it's section 42, where he talks about the welfare state. So this principle of subsidiarity says that there's human solidarity, and I would say get involved with people and really expend your energies, not just thinking that the solution to somebody's problem is a handout, but the solution to these problems are human bonding, human community, and then you see what the needs really are. It's not just giving out money on the street corner because you don't know who these people are. It's saying, well, who are you? What is it you really need? You need something to eat? And I've done this many times. I don't give out money on the street when people come up to me on the street. If I have time, if the moment is right, I've taken people over to McDonald's or sat down in a restaurant with them and stuff. Part of the time they say, no, I just want the money. Well, okay, and I'm not going to give it to you. But if you're telling me you're hungry, and in my parish, we do this kind of thing. We have a group that deals with those who are in need. We don't just give out money. We come to know the family. We pray with them, and then we'll pay repair for a car. We'll give them rent for the month or 2 months. If we know the situation and know this is going to really kind of boost up somebody up and get them going. Those honest people who really have human needs, we're in solidarity with. We know them, we know who they are and their families and stuff, and we help as best we can. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you help and it doesn't work out, but at least you're there in solidarity with real people. It's not this abstract, I'm going to vote in favor of a piece of legislation and thereby I fulfilled my moral obligation to the poor.
Yeah, it's almost like a form of laziness is what I've noticed well, I'm going to stand in solidarity with poor people, so I'm going to vote for somebody who says I'm going to give more things to poor people.
By spending your money, I'm going to be in solidarity with the poor, even if I haven't met one of them. There's this group called Bread for the World. You may have heard of it. And it came to a parish I was in many years ago, and they wanted to help, and everybody was all excited. This is great. And I went on the site, and I watched their video and all of this stuff, and the food being exchanged over steamy, kitchens and stuff. And I realized at the end of this, they don't feed a single person. It's a lobbying organization. What they do is they monitor legislation in Washington, D.C., and then send homily notes to preachers and letters, model letters for the people in the parishes to write to their congressmen for this or that piece of legislation. It's all about redistribution. They don't give a single loaf of bread to anyone.
Oh, my gosh. Again, people just defining terms. That's
right.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're a pro-life person, this easiest way for you to get involved is get involved in your pregnancy resource center, and you will see that's what the work of the PRCs do. Is they're not just handing out money; they're meeting people where they're at, starting up a conversation, asking them where they want to go, and then meeting those needs. I know no pregnancy center where a woman walks in the door and needs all this stuff and they turn her away.
No,
The goal is, let's talk, let's figure out what it is that you truly need.
really.
And I think going back to your earlier point where you're talking about the family and how, the principle subsidiary of those at the local level. I mean, that's what's so devastating about the destruction of our families is, and that's what who you see enter into those pregnancy center doors. And very often it's not a young girl who has a strong family who's walking in.
Oh,
she's
very rarely.
she's walking there to replace her family because she doesn't have anyone to turn to. So thank you so much, Father Sircio, for
Thank
coming on
you.
today.
God bless your work.
I feel like we could have talked for hours, but pray for us and our mission at Students for Life and for all the young pro-life leaders across the country for what we're doing every day. But thank you for your wisdom. And
Let
everyone
me
needs
just,
to go
if
to Acton to
I,
get more
I was
information.
just going to
Watch your
say,
videos.
little commercial, especially for the students, go to acton.org
Okay.
and look at the programs that we have so that you can be aware, so you can speak more holistically to people about these economic questions. We have a bunch of scholarships. Acton University is coming up. Much of it this year is still virtual, but we have scholarships for you. Please take advantage. Acton.org.
All right. Thank you, Father. I really appreciate your time today. Bye-bye.